back to LillySquared,
a video podcast by women for women.
And kind of just wanted to start out with this.
Of course.
Just I'm never going to stop doing this for probably the next month and a half.
And as you should, as I think all of KU should.
And I do want to point out all of the wins from the KU team.
Let's get right into that real quick.
I mean, first off, women's basketball season started, and they almost broke 100 points. I mean,
their very first
come
game.
On.
Impressive.
KU men's basketball took down Michigan State, and
as you had before.
KU men's football took down Texas.
Yes, they did.
Freaking Texas.
And man, I'm still, I think, so impressed and still reminiscing about the KU football win. I'm reminiscing about KU men's basketball and especially the women's basketball team. They are 2-0 in their season, and they have a game tomorrow night. Don't forget about that. And from what I saw from this week, I'm very proud to be a Jayhawk fan, I got to say.
All right. Well, let's not get into this too much.
Yes.
But Soleil will recap more in the show a little later. But now we want to get into the topic for this week. Last week we did talk about press conferences and the different types of questions female athletes get asked versus male athletes.
Now, I feel like one of the questions that we did mention during the show last week is female athletes get asked about motherhood and having kids and starting families while male athletes don't. And unfortunately, it can be a scary time for a female professional athlete if they do end up becoming pregnant and planning to have a kid, because it's, one, a controversial issue, and two, it could potentially affect their career.
Yeah.
Some individuals think that it's amazing that these athletes still train and compete when they are expecting, while others do not think it's too okay for women to become pregnant when they have to compete at a professional level, because they feel like they should be their best all the time because it's their job, and that's where the controversial topic comes in.
Yeah, and the fact that the pregnancy is a controversial topic in the sports industry is absolutely ridiculous. Athletes should not feel the need to put off starting a family because of their job. And
I 100% agree with you. And I think it can be agreed that maternity leave and parental benefits may not be the first thing that comes to mind when us as women are fighting for equality or like bringing up topics that support female athletes. It's kind of like a normal topic, but not talked about enough, I guess, because it rarely happens. But it needs to be a topic that needs to be talked about more, and hence why we're doing it this week.
Yeah, and one story that really proves this and really shows this subject off is Allison Felix's story. Her story is the perfect example of why having children is okay when you're a professional athlete. It's not frowned upon.
And a little background on who Allison Felix is. Well, she's an amazing Olympic athlete who competes in track and field and has around 11 medals, which is amazing. She is also one of Nike's most marketed athletes. However, when she found out that she was getting ready to have a child and starting a family, she feared that she would have no maternity protections under Nike.
And she started that becoming pregnant as an athlete can be the kiss of death, if you quote, to your athletic career because of endorsements and sponsorships. Unfortunately, that fear of not having protections was somewhat accurate. She was in contract with Nike about how her contract, when she knew she was pregnant and expecting, is she asked Nike to keep the same pay as she would get if she was not pregnant. Nike had declined her request and was going to pay her 70% less because she was pregnant.
And when I saw that number, when we were looking, I know 70% like out of her 100% contract just because she was going to have a child is insane to me and really disappointing. Like, because according to Allison, one of her biggest reasons why she signed and wanted to have a sponsorship with Nike was because she thought their core principles were empowering women and accepting them for who they are, no matter what it may be.
Yeah, and after Allison's story made headlines, a few other athletes came forward with similar stories as well. Then change started to occur. Some brands such as Burton and Ultra started to change their contracts which fully support women who decline to have kids and start families even if they were competing.
And then, interesting enough, a few days after Allison's story was heard and then these brands started to change their language in their contracts, Nike changed theirs as well. However, if we retrack, they declined her request to keep her contract
initially
is same and wanted to cut it 100%. And that's disappointing because support for athletes should have been implemented, and no brand should have had to change their contracts regardless, because there already should have been rules and regulations within those contracts that had the language saying that you were protected no matter what. And it just speaks out against, like I said, a major flaw that big brands just don't think about.
Yeah, and another example we can discuss is Serena Williams. Williams was expecting her first child just 2 days before the Australian Open. No one knew, and she shared that she was going to still be expected to compete at the same level as she would if she was not pregnant, meaning she was expected to win no matter if she was pregnant or not.
She ended up winning the Open, and then later she announced her pregnancy. Most people praised her even more for that win because she was pregnant when she competed, while others questioned like how she could even accomplish something like that while expecting. And personally, I think she should have been given way more credit anyways for, one, not even announcing her pregnancy before that match, because she was expected to win and there was no other way around it. And she knew for herself as a female professional athlete, that she wasn't going to get that out or get that excuse like handed to her. Like, she had to win.
Yeah, and I think it's so impressive the way professional female athletes can balance playing a sport and motherhood, because people have no idea what it's like as a woman's body goes through that process of, you know, having a baby. It's like no other. It's Mother Nature's job. It's crazy, and I can't imagine balancing, you know, preparing your body to have a child and also preparing your body to play that sport. And after you have the baby, that whole process of getting your body back to where it was,
giving it a rest
is hard. And, you know, like you said, you have to give your body rest and you have to, you know, nurture your body, but also it's your job and it's your child, and it's a huge balance of like, you know, what do I do?
What's more
best?
important than the other? Yeah, exactly. And I could have not said it better myself. And like you said, your body's not the same. However, like, and most recent, like what I was reading, it seemed like that these athletes would just bounce right back.
Yeah.
And just like not stop. I mean, Serena Williams was back competing just after 8 months of having her daughter. Well, most mothers have to take almost a year or more to recover from having a kid. It just shows just how like strong, resilient, and amazing these female professional athletes can be. Like, they balance two such important things that like revolves around their whole life.
Yeah. And there are also some leagues that are taking steps to make sure female athletes do not need to feel the rush to come back into competing or training. And one league that is trying to implement policies surrounding maternity leave is the WNBA. They had announced to players that they would implement a full policy that would give athletes full maternity paid leave.
And I gotta say, like, we've mentioned the WNBA before, but that's just a big win for those athletes in the WNBA.
Yeah.
And the stress of not knowing if you're gonna get paid or not just because you wanna start a family is just lifted off for these female athletes. And I'm hoping to see more rules and regulations that pertain to maternity leave starting to be implemented in professional leagues more and more, because that was the only thing that I kind of read was the WNBA was one of the only leagues that had like straight out like full protections for their contracts.
Yeah, and this conversation / topic surrounding maternity leave and contracts, regulations, pay, etc. doesn't just stop when talking about female athletes. It is a topic that can affect all women in any work industry. Some women still battle with the stress of losing a job or taking a pay cut when planning to have a child.
Yeah, I appreciate that final input because it does pertain to everyone and not just female athletes, and that's what I think is so cool about these topics. You can tie them into like almost any female. So, like I said, thanks for that, Lil. And now Soleil is out on Jayhawk Boulevard asking students their stance on whether or not athletes put off playing their professional sport to have a kid. So let's go to Soleil.
for that, Soleil.
I thought it was interesting how she asked students questions of how many Olympians did have kids when they were competing, and
the range of numbers.
I know some most of them did a really high amount of number, while in reality it's very, very, very low.
Yeah.
Well, that's all that we have for this week for this topic, but we're going to go to a quick commercial break, and when we come back, Soleil will be back to bring you sports recap for KU.
A lot of our waste ends up discarded in the environment, causing pollution, but we can help to reduce this pollution by recycling. There are many recycling bins on KU's campus. And when you're not on campus, take advantage of these bins offered in many retail stores. You should also try to reduce your use of plastic by using these refillable water jugs. Our actions have a huge impact on the environment, so make sure to do your part to keep it clean.
Welcome back to another sports recap. The Kansas Jayhawks travel to Austin, Texas. I'm not kidding when I say the Kansas Jayhawks beat the Texas Longhorns in overtime on the road in football. I'm going to repeat that again. The Kansas Jayhawks have beaten the Texas Longhorns on the road. I know, I am just as shocked as you. The first quarter, Kansas came out strong and full of energy. The player of the game, Devin Neal, put Kansas on the board with a 3-yard run. The defense put in the work holding the Longhorns the entire first quarter. Mason Fairchild scores a 11-yard run, putting Kansas 14 and Texas 0. Texas ties the game halfway through the second quarter. Jalen Daniels and Devin Neal score a touchdown to make the score 28-14. Just when you thought the game couldn't get any better, Jacoby Bryant gets a pick six going into the half, 35-14. After the half, Devin Neal scores a 10-yard run. Texas was fighting back into the fourth, 42-35. The last quarter of the game, Jalen Daniels hands off to Lassiter II for a 2-yard run. Defense had a hard time holding Texas as they tied the game going into overtime. Texas was the first to put on the score in overtime, putting Longhorns on top for the first time all throughout the game. Now that the play Lawrence will be talking about for years and years. Devin Neal's 2-yard run. Then Kansas decides to go for a 2-point conversion. Jalen Daniels throws to freshman Jared Casey to win the game in overtime. Jared Casey is now called the hero of the game. The Jayhawks ended their 8-game losing streak and 56-game losing streak in Big 12 on the road. Devin Neal has been named Big 12 Offensive Player of the Week. Also, the Kansas Jayhawks have been named Cheez-It Bowl National Team of the Week. That's all the sports recap I have for the week. Now to Lily with fantasy football.
What's up, everyone? Getting right into Week 10 fantasy football update, and let's get ready for Week 11. First off, I do want to start off by saying the Chiefs are back, baby. After a huge win against the Raiders, might I add, in Vegas, it boosted us back to the top of the AFC West standings, followed by the Raiders, then with the Chargers in third place, and not surprising with the Broncos back at the bottom of the standings. Teddy Bridgewater is allergic to producing in the red zone. Is it time to bring back Drew Lock? Probably not. Not a good option. On the other hand, we are past the halfway point of the season, and the most valuable player award is a full season watch list. Usually there's a couple players that are leading the way in the race, but right now there is one player standing out to me. Cooper freaking Kupp. Dude has been balling out and has been the highest scoring and most valuable player in fantasy football so far in 2021. Combining volume, explosive plays, and touchdowns, as he has a true shot at the NFL's receiving triple crown of leading the league in catches, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. He has seemingly lived up in the end zone and proved to be the best value of any pick. He's been so good this year. I might start him in a Week 11 during his bye out of respect. Anyways, let's get into this week's waiver pickups. There are 2 teams on a bye week this week, and those teams do include the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Rams. First up, I have Ramondre Stevenson, running back for the New England Patriots, rostered in 9.9% of ESPN fantasy leagues. With Damian Harris out in Week 10, that left Stevenson to start and step up into a big role, and he did just that as he finished second among all running backs with 27.4 fantasy points. Stevenson also finished for 100 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, while adding 4 catches. The talent is obvious with Stevenson, and with a short week prior to the Patriots' next game, you will have to closely monitor whether Harris is available in Week 11. If not, Stevenson is a top 20 running back, and he should be added in all fantasy leagues. Next up, I suggest Dan Arnold, tight end for the Jacksonville Jaguars, rostered in 26.1% of fantasy leagues. Arnold has been a busy man since being acquired in a trade by the Jaguars and is now up 37 targets over his past 5 games, scoring at least 10 fantasy points in 4 of them. Where Arnold has not yet done this season is score a receiving touchdown, but he has at least 60 receiving yards in 4 of his past 5 games. Volume is hard to come by at the end of the tight end spot. He's an add in all fantasy leagues. Last one I'm going to go in depth about is Ray McCloud, wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, rostered in 0.8% of ESPN fantasy leagues. It's hard to know what to make of McCloud's Week 10 performance, as he was a vacuum for targets for the first time this season. He had 10 targets alone in Week 10, 2 more than he had for the entirety of the season prior to the game. But with Chase Claypool out, the team is looking for answers at a wide receiver, and it's possible it might have found a short-term solution in McCloud, a deeper league consideration. I am going to mention a few more names for you to consider, but I'm not going to go in depth. Rashad Bateman, wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens, Elijah Moore, wide receiver for the New York Jets, and Wayne Gallman, running back for the Atlanta Falcons. That's all I have for you in fantasy football, but stay tuned because I will be back shortly with fantasy basketball. But right now, we're going to take a short break, and Lily will be back with her NFL update.
Where you go to college makes a statement about you. This place will become a part of you, your identity for life. The University of Kansas, a great place to be you.
Welcome back to this week's NFL recap. I'm your host, Lily Witkowski. All right, folks, we are finally over that halfway point and have hit double digits, and the number of weeks in the NFL has been in regular season play. That's right, the NFL is at Week 10, and let's get right into recapping this week. Ever heard of the saying, defense wins championships? Well, in Week 10, the popular saying was proven by 2 NFL teams. First team that played an impressive game was the Dallas Cowboys. First off, their offense had a total of 43 points. I say that is definitely a bounce back from the Cowboys' loss against Denver the week before. I mean, the Cowboys just ripped Atlanta apart with a 29-point run in the second quarter. Ezekiel Elliott also looked good like himself again after scoring 2 touchdowns. And now to give credit where the credit is due. The Broncos definitely ripped apart this week and exposed the Broncos ripped apart Dallas last week, but this week, Dallas defense made sure that wouldn't happen again. The Cowboys allowed Atlanta to gain a 58 yards in the first drive, but after that, only 19 yards the rest of the half. Also, Atlanta did not finish pretty in stats when it came to halftime. Thanks to the Dallas defense, Atlanta was 0-5 on third downs and 0-1 on a fourth down attempt. In the red zone, there were 0-1, the only red zone attempt they were given that half. Things did not get better for Atlanta come the second half, and the score says it itself, only 3 points Atlanta scored. 3 points. Well, on a brighter note, at least the Falcons were able to score because that was not the case when it came to the Seattle Seahawks-Green Bay game. Now, before I break down the dangerous Packers defense that I think is a top 5 right now, I do want to break down the matchup a little bit. As a fan that was watching the game, disappointment is all I can say. I mean, 2 teams that have such a dramatic history when playing up against each other, my expectations were pretty high for this matchup. However, Russell Wilson was just activated after recovering from his finger surgery, and Rodgers made his return after being inactive for 10 days due to COVID-19. Also, both quarterbacks did not play their best. Rodgers had an interception in the red zone, which is pretty rare, and about a 62% completion rating. And on Wilson's end, he never got a solid rhythm going. He had 2 interceptions, sacked 3 times, 50% completion rating, and had 0 touchdowns as well. A rough day for Rodgers, a rougher day for Wilson. However, I cannot say that the Seahawks had an off day just because of the offense. It was the Packers' defense that made the dramatic impact. There was a 0 on the scoreboard when the game ended. So how good is the Packers' defense? Well, if you did not think that the team was a number 5 defense after the game against KC, I say you should start maybe thinking that they are a top 5 now. This was the first shutout that Green Bay had since they played the Buffalo Bills in 2018. So what did the Packers defense do against Seattle? Well, they picked off Wilson twice in the end zone, held the Seahawks for 75 rushing yards, sacked quarterback Russell Wilson 3 times, and only allowed Seattle to convert 7 out of 15 times, which brings it about to a 46% completion rating on third downs. The big question that I'm going to ask is, do the Packers finally have a Super Bowl contender defense since 2010? Personally, I'm going to say yes. They've definitely earned a top 5 spot. Maybe it's not the 2010 defensive team, but I mean, they faced Murray, Mahomes, and Wilson in consecutive weeks and have held the trio of quarterbacks to 34 combined points. Impressive. Now, real quick before I end this recap, I do need to point out the fact that the Chiefs now sit at number 1 in the AFC West and are just below 3 other teams in the rest of the AFC. Does this mean that the Chiefs are coming back out of this so-called losing streak drought, or are they winning because they were playing teams that were at a disadvantage the past few weeks? And, I mean, last week the Chiefs played the Packers, and the Packers didn't have Rodgers. I say that the call can be made next week if they're playoff contenders or not, because the next challenge that the Chiefs face is the Cowboys. If they pull off a win, I think that they can be back in conversation about playoff favorites. All right, that is all I have for you guys this week for Week 10. But after this short break, Lily will be back again as she will give her thoughts on NBA fantasy. She did the NFL earlier on, but guys, come on. She couldn't forget about giving you guys her best thoughts on the NBA waiver pickups.
No, I don't know, though. I'm scared.
Do you know that you're in my lane? No, not at all. Are you not paying attention? Are you texting? I was just checking in with my mom. I was telling her that I thought we'd be home by 6. It's okay. There's enough time. Just pay attention. I'm not even halfway through my text. There's no way. I'm not even going to look up. My babies are in the car. You have to pay attention. It's just supposed to be a quick text. I'm so sorry.
Thank you for that, Lily. What's up, everyone? I'm here again with some fantasy basketball waiver pickups for y'all. But I do want to discuss, kind of like my goal and what I want you guys to get out of this. This weekly series is to identify players available in at least half of ESPN leagues at each position. Some nominations are specialists capable of helping in 1 or 2 categories, while others deliver more diverse and important statistical offerings. In the breakdowns below, I've ordered players at each position with the priority of addition in mind, rather than roster percentage in ESPN leagues. I will list a player for each position that you should consider rostering. First up, I have point guard, and I suggest TJ Mcconnell for the Indiana Pacers. Similar to last season, the fantasy market and managers take a long time to appreciate McConnell's unique statistical profile. After leading the NBA in steals last season, McConnell is driving value this season as a passer. The point guard is 16th in the NBA in total dimes. Next up, I have Grayson Allen, shooting guard for the Milwaukee Bucks. Allen has a stellar scoring stretch while averaging 20.4 points per game in his last 5 games. Absurd shooting success during this sample includes the Duke product sinking 4.8 three-pointers per game, evidence he's capable of providing starting fantasy value when afforded such shooting freedom. Next, I have Dylan Brooks, small forward for the Memphis Grizzlies. Coming off the bench for Memphis last Wednesday night to make his season debut, Brooks scored 17 and has since re-entered the starting lineup. Solid scoring and steal rates drive potential for Brooks' value as starting shooting guard for the Grizzlies. Next up, I have Bobby Portis, power forward for the Milwaukee Bucks. In absence of Chris Middleton, has fueled a bigger role for Portis in recent games. with the savvy scoring forward averaging 17.8 points per game and 8.5 rebounds per game during last week. Last, I have Andre Drummond, center for the Philadelphia 76ers. Roster percentage exceptions can be made at center given how shallow the position proves, which is to say we should be more willing to take interim values as Drummond on our rosters. This rebounding machine has averaged 18.3 boards in the past week while starting in place of Joel Embiid. All right, that's all I have for you in Fantasy Basketball Week this week. And I want to thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of LillySquared. Tune in next week at the same time for more. Have a good one. Bye, y'all.